Imagine you are a monk in the year 793. You are copying manuscripts in a coastal monastery when someone shouts from the watchtower. You look out to sea and see something you don't understand. Ships with dragon heads emerging from the fog. There is no time to flee. There is no army to protect you. What comes from the sea does not negotiate. It does not forgive. And the worst part is that no one in Europe knows what to call what is about to happen. Today you will meet the men who forced the world to invent new ways to describe terror. Part 1. The Predators of Chaos. Before there were Viking armies, before the great fleets and the sieges that lasted for months, there was something worse. There were men on the loose, individuals who answered to no king, whose only loyalty was to chaos itself. These were not soldiers. They were predators. And what made them terrifying was not their strength, but the impossibility of anticipating their next move. There is a city in Italy that, during the 9th century, was considered impregnable. Its walls were thick, its defenders numerous. No conventional army could take it without months of siege. And yet, it fell in a single night. Not to an army, to a funeral. The guards saw a small procession arrive, warriors from the north carrying a coffin. Their leader, they said, had died of illness, and his last wish was to receive a Christian burial within the city. The clergy, moved, opened the gates. The coffin entered in a solemn procession. And then the lid opened. The man who jumped from the coffin wasn't dead. He was very much alive. Before the guards could react, the gates were already open from the inside, and hundreds of warriors poured in. The city that no army could take fell in a matter of hours. The man in the coffin's name was Hastein. But what was disturbing about Hastein wasn't that deception. It was that he never repeated the same tactic twice. Frankish chroniclers wrote with frustration that it was impossible to prepare for him. He negotiated when it suited him, attacked when it seemed he was about to negotiate, retreated to lay ambushes, feigned weakness to lure enemy reinforcements, and massacre them along the way. He crossed the Mediterranean with 60 ships alongside Björn Ironside, raided coastlines that had never seen a Viking, sacked ports in the Balearic Islands, attacked cities in Al-Andalus that the emirs believed to be untouchable. Björn returned laden with treasure while the kingdoms he left behind tried to understand what had happened. He even destroyed the port infrastructure of the cities he sacked, ensuring that it would take generations for them to recover. Hastein wasn't the strongest. He was simply impossible to read. When you can't predict your enemy, every shadow becomes a threat. Hastein didn't just attack cities. He infected the minds of an entire continent with paranoia. But if Hastein was calculated terror, there was another who embodied something more primal, something the Vikings themselves feared. In Iceland, mothers warned their children about a man who had killed for the first time at the age of 7. During a game that turned violent, he took an axe and buried it in the skull of an older boy. When asked why, he showed no remorse. He simply said the other boy had cheated. That boy grew up to be Egil Skallagrimsson. What made Egil different from other berserkers was that he didn't lose control. He chose to. He killed with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a predator. And when he was done, he wrote poems about it. In one battle, he killed 11 men before the general fighting even began. Survivors described him as a wolf, silent before attacking, unstoppable once he smelled blood. He received wounds that should have killed him and kept fighting as if pain were fuel. But here's the unsettling part. Egil wasn't all muscle and rage. He was intelligent. When King Eric Bloodaxe condemned him to death, Egil wrote a poem so masterfully flattering that the king was forced by honor to spare his life. The man who killed without mercy could also disarm with words. Egil held grudges for decades. He crossed oceans to kill men who had wronged him years before. Entire families lived, knowing that, at some point, Egil would come. They didn't know when. They only knew he would come, because Egil never forgot, and Egil never forgave. These early predators represented individual terror, the fear that comes not from armies but from solitary men so dangerous they disrupt the behavior of entire kingdoms. But what comes next is worse, because these lone wolves eventually found packs. What you just heard wasn't a war, it was hunting. Men so unpredictable that they turned paranoia into politics. And this was only the beginning. If you want to continue descending into this story, where terror learns to organize itself, then leave a like and subscribe now, because lone wolves are about to form packs. Part 2. The Warlords. There was a moment when Viking terror ceased to be random and became systematic, when raiding parties transformed into coordinated fleets, when chaos became organized. Björn Ragnarsson carried the blood of legend in his veins. He was the son of Ragnar, a name that made Frankish kings tremble. But Björn inherited more than a name. He inherited an ambition his father never fulfilled. Between 859 and 862, Björn led an expedition that redefined what it meant to be a Viking. 60 ships crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, a passage the Muslims considered entirely their own. He attacked Al-Andalus while the emirs tried to understand where these demons from the north were coming from, appearing unannounced from seas they thought they controlled. He plundered the Balearic Islands. He razed cities on the African coast. He reached as far as Italy, leaving a trail of destruction that Mediterranean chroniclers would compare to the biblical plagues. Never before had a Viking projected power so far beyond Scandinavia. But what made Björn legendary wasn't his victories. It was his ability to survive defeats. Near the Rhone, a storm destroyed part of his fleet. The Franks attacked immediately. Any other commander would have been annihilated. Björn regrouped his survivors, led a breakout by land, and escaped. The Franks, celebrating his demise, watched his sails disappear over the horizon. When Björn Ironside appeared on your shore, you knew one thing. Defeating him once meant nothing. He would return. He always returned. His nickname, Ironside, and came from his uncanny ability to absorb punishment and keep going. And while Björn proved that Vikings could project power across entire seas, another man proved something even more terrifying, that Vikings could stay. Rollo the Walker was too big to ride a horse, literally. He walked alongside his men as they rode, yet he led them with an unquestioned authority. His physical stature was legendary, but it was his strategic mind that changed the course of European history forever. He participated in the siege of Paris from 885 to 886, constructing siege engines, attempting to breach the bridges that defended the city, and slaughtering defenders for what seemed like endless months. Paris held, but Rollo took note of something more important than victory. He took note of how much the Franks were willing to pay for him to leave. In the following years, Rollo perfected an unprecedented strategy. He didn't plunder and flee. He plundered and stayed. He took Rouen and fortified it. He imposed taxes. He executed those who resisted. The Franks tried to expel him and failed. In 911, King Charles the Simple negotiated. He offered Rollo lands and titles in exchange for peace. What we know today as Normandy was born from that negotiation. A Viking had forced a Christian kingdom to recognize him as an equal. Rollo's descendants would conquer England in 1066. And then there was Eric Bloodaxe, the king who built his throne on the corpses of his own brothers. Eric was the son of Harold Beautiful Hair. When his father died, Eric had competition, many brothers. The saga's record that he personally killed at least 5 of them, not in battle, in calculated eliminations, and one by one until none remained. But his brutality eventually caught up with him. The Norwegian nobles expelled him. Eric sailed to England, where the Northumbrian nobles invited him to rule York. Eric ruled with an iron fist. He destroyed churches, confiscated lands, and executed opponents. When the English king tried to reclaim the north, Eric pursued his army and massacred the rear guard. Eric Bloodaxe represented something new. The Viking who didn't come to plunder and leave. The Viking who came to stay and rule. Through absolute fear. Chaos no longer attacks randomly. Now it plans, conquers, and rules. The Vikings stopped appearing and began to stay. What's coming isn't plunder. It's an empire. Like and subscribe, because in the next part you'll meet the men who transformed fear into a system of absolute power. In part 3, the Kings of Terror. There comes a point where a temporary form becomes permanent. The Vikings reached that point when terror ceased to be a tool and became a system of government. To understand what's coming, you need to forget everything the TV shows have taught you about Ragnar Lothbrok. The historical Ragnar wasn't a tragic hero. He was a catalyst for continent-wide destruction. In 845, a fleet of 120 ships sailed up the Seine. Paris saw the dragon ships appear and realized there was no escape. The defenders were massacred. Ragnar publicly executed prisoners on an island opposite the city, making sure everyone saw what awaited them if they resisted. King Charles the Bald paid 7,000 pounds of silver to Ragnar to leave. It was the first time a Christian kingdom had paid Vikings to avoid destruction. Ragnar had demonstrated something that would change Europe. It was more profitable to pay than to fight. And once the Vikings learned that, they never stopped getting paid. Ragnar died when he was captured by King Aelle of Northumbria and executed. But his death was not the end. It was the spark. His sons assembled the Great Heathen Army, the largest invasion force England had ever seen, and they came for revenge. Among those children, there was one who didn't need to walk to be the most dangerous. Ivar the Boneless. Historians debate whether his nickname came from a bone disease, extraordinary flexibility in combat, or something else entirely that the sources failed to capture. What they don't dispute is his military genius. Ivar couldn't lead from the front lines like other Viking warriors. He couldn't charge the enemy lines with an axe in hand, so he learned to lead from the mind, and he proved to be infinitely more dangerous that way. When the Great Heathen Army landed in 865, Ivar was its mastermind. He devised the tactics. He identified the structural weaknesses of each kingdom. He exploited the political divisions among the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms with surgical precision. He captured Nottingham through a combination of siege and psychological warfare that forced its surrender without a decisive battle. He took York, England's second most important city, in a blow the defenders never saw coming. And then came the revenge. King Aella was captured, and here history blends with legend. The sagas tell of the Blood Eagle, a ritual where the victim's back was opened, ribs separated, all and lungs pulled out like wings while still breathing. Historians debate whether it actually happened, but here's the important thing. It doesn't matter if it was real. What matters is that people believed it. That image did more for the Viking reputation than any battle. Ivar understood something that few understand. Fear doesn't need to be true. It only needs to be believable. Generations later, that legacy reached its definitive form with Svein Partbeard. Svein had a decades-long plan. From the 1990s onward, he launched coordinated attacks against England, designed to systematically weaken the kingdom's ability to resist. Year after year, his fleets appeared. Year after year, England paid tribute. Each payment weakened her further. Each payment funded larger fleets. In 1013, Svein stopped collecting tribute and decided to claim the entire kingdom. City after city fell. King Ethelred fled. On Christmas Day 1013, Svein was recognized as King of England. A Viking ruled the kingdom his ancestors had terrorized for generations. His son Cnut completed the work. Cnut the Great ruled an empire that included England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden. It was called the North Sea Empire, and it was no empty title. Cnut controlled the sea routes that connected northern Europe. He systematically executed opponents. He confiscated lands from families who showed the slightest resistance. He replaced local nobles with loyal Scandinavians who owed him everything. He maintained standing fleets that could appear on any coast without warning. His network of spies and informants ensured that any conspiracy was crushed before it even began. The last king of terror was Harald Hardrada. His name means the merciless, and he earned it through a lifetime of relentless warfare. He spent his youth as a mercenary in the Varangian Guard of Byzantium, fighting in Italy, the Balkans, and the Eastern Mediterranean. He learned tactics from the greatest generals in the known world. He saw how the most sophisticated armies of the time operated, and then he returned north to apply all that knowledge with Scandinavian brutality. Harald unified Norway with the same ruthlessness he had used in foreign lands. He eliminated rivals. He crushed rebellions before they could even organize. He built a fleet that was the envy of all Scandinavia. And in 1066, he decided that Norway was not enough for a man of his ambition. He claimed the throne of England. At the Battle of Fulford, he massacred an English army. York surrendered. The north was in his hands. And then came Stamford Bridge. The English king, Harold Godwinson, marched with impossible speed from the south. The battle was brutal. Harald Hardrada died with an arrow in his throat. His death marked the end of the Viking Age. The last great warrior king of the north fell trying to win one last crown. And so ended the age of Viking terror, not with a slow decline, but with the violent death of the last of the greats on an English battlefield. But here's the uncomfortable truth the books ignore. The Vikings weren't defeated. They transformed. They became Normans who conquered England. They became Russians who founded kingdoms. The terror didn't disappear. It just changed form. The fear they sowed never truly died. It just learned to use other names. If this journey into the heart of Norse terror has left you wanting more, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories of warriors who changed the world.